a Doctor Who podcast network.
Well, hi everybody. Welcome back to Doctor Who Literature. My name is Jason. We're a member of the Direction Point Doctor Who podcast network. What follows is a pre-recorded episode. We are going out of order. We are swapping out the November 1987 and December 1987 Target books. I am in the middle of a short stretch of time in the British Isles. This week, we cover the December 87 book, book 123, The Macra Terror. My guest is executive producer David Barsky. We will have a no holds barred conversation with our share of sharply worded and contentious disagreements. Next week, we will dip back to November 1987 and target book number 122, The Massacre. I will have two guests planned for that episode, and of course my audio essay about each novelization will follow the guest interview. We will resume our regular schedule in 2 weeks' time, but for now I will dispense with the usual chatter from this opening segment, and instead, let's get to it.
The vervoids are probably the best dirty joke in Doctor Who.
They're hermaphroditic plants.
A lot of plants are.
So there you go. It's based on science.
No, they'll ship anything.
There are probably 11 and handle shippers out there. You just have to drill a hole where his mouth is, and you're all set.
You know he needs the room. I've seen it in pictures.
I'm not saying you're not a fan. I'm saying you don't know what the fuck you're talking about.
Doctor Who gives a drunken Doctor Who podcast for the end times. You are listening to Doctor Who Literature. Keep turning the pages!
All right, David Barsky, you asked very early on to do one novelization for each Doctor, so this week it is time for Patrick Troughton, but first, as you and I usually do, we're going to play a little game of show and tell. Let me show you what just arrived in the mail at Casa de Doctor Who Literature.
Oh boy. Oh yeah, I saw that, baby.
It is the Lego Jaws set.
Oh yeah, I love that. I like the. How many pieces does that one have again?
1,497.
Well, that's not bad.
So Lego Ideas is the user pitches the idea and Lego builds it for you, but only if it gets a certain number of upvotes on the website. But Jaws is the universal language, so it's not only Jaws, but other sides of the box also call it, in French, the teeth of the sea, Dent de la Mer. And then in Spanish, it's like one of your neighboring cities in California, Tiburon.
Yeah, not quite so neighboring, but a nice 6-hour drive.
And of course, on the side of the box, we have our 3 minifigs.
Oh man, that is great.
In the order in which they're listed in the opening credit title. We have Quint, we have Chief Brody, and we have Richard Dreyfuss as Matt Hooper, plus, of course, Bruce the Shark.
That is amazing.
I cannot wait to put this together. Of course, we are leaving tomorrow for Europe and we'll be gone for a while, so I won't be able to actually assemble this until end of the month, but I'm very excited to get to it.
That's a good one. That's a real good one. It's a couple rooms away, but I just finished repacking my Millennium. No, what was it? It was Star Destroyer. I built that last year and I had it up and I packaged it up and I gotta eventually get it to Steven Shapansky because he inherits all my Lego sets.
Yeah, he is Legopolis on Twitter, which I'm not on anymore.
Yeah, we always, we talk various Legos and stuff like that, but I gave him my Slave One Boba Fett ship when I did that a few years back, and I just, I like building them. I like usually after a production or something, I'll do Lego therapy, I called it. So I've been debating my next set. I really have been thinking about it, and I don't know what I'm gonna get. I usually like to do a Star Wars one. I'm really kind of still kicking myself for missing the Sandcrawler. I really wanted to get that set, but I never did. I'm sure if I really wanted to pay a pretty penny, I could find it somewhere.
I have Luke's X-Wing fighter in one of the shelves on either side of our TV console. The problem is we have a tradition in this family. The first thing we do in any given year is on January 1st, we go to the Lego store right opposite the Flatiron building in Manhattan, 23rd Street and 5th Avenue. So every January 1st, I get myself a fancy new Lego set. The problem is, up until the pandemic, I was building all of my Legos at work, and I would go 5 or 10 steps a day in the instruction book for each day that I was in the office. Number one, the pandemic meant that I wasn't in my office for 2.5 years. And then at some point in the interim, I was in the middle of the San Francisco skyline when we were sent home for good, March 19th, 2020. And some of the pieces of the set disappeared in between March 2020 and then the end of 2022 when I started to try and finish the project. So I have to send away for the missing pieces, and I keep forgetting to do it. So I have a halfway built San Francisco skyline sitting on my desk at work, plus the next 3 or 4 boxes in reserve that I've been buying every January 1st. So, the rise of remote work has been deadly towards my Lego aspirations.
Yeah, that's always a problem. I usually build mine on the dining room table, so we have to eat elsewhere when I'm doing it.
Yeah, you have a home. I have a New York City apartment, and also you don't have cats. If Smudge got anywhere near my Lego, that would be the end of my Lego.
End of your Lego? How about the end of the cat? You got to punish the cat, man.
We did build the Apollo 11 lander, and Callie and I did that in one day, keeping the cat at bay. And now it's sitting on top of my bookshelf in the next room. It's actually right over my Doctor Who DVDs.
Be careful. I don't trust cats.
Well, Smudge is being a jerk. We're trying to put Smudge into boarding because obviously we're getting on a plane, and she is having none of it. She is all, no, I'm going to hide until you forget about me. So Ginger is at the boarding right now, and Smudge is hiding behind my work desk, my home work desk.
You gotta tell them what's what. Those cats. You never know.
All right, so let's talk about Patrick Troughton. I recently joined, and this may be against my better judgment, I recently joined Ian Levine's Facebook group where he's getting funding for his AI reconstructions of all the missing episodes, and Macra Terror falls into that category. Anybody can join the group as long as you swear a loyalty pledge to Ian Levine, but you only get to see the episodes if you send him cash money. That is a bridge that I have yet to cross, but I am sorely tempted.
Yeah, I've seen clips of them, and they look pretty darn good, man. Best effort yet from anybody on the front, I would say, from what I've seen. I had a discussion with a friend of mine about this very subject about 6 weeks ago, and he sent me the link. Because I wasn't I'm not online very much, so I was aware of them. I saw some clips, as I said, but I didn't know there was a subscription thing, and I'm more than tempted. I think I'm going to pull the trigger because I think it's completely worth it, considering some of the animations we're getting.
I'm worried about enabling some of the more toxic elements of fandom, and if you read the comments on this group, the most toxic elements of fandom all come here to hang. I also have a moral objection to any technology that's express purposes to eliminate my job, so AI and I are not the best of friends, but the idea of seeing the stories in their original format with the original camera scripts it's the closest that we'll get visually to what those episodes look like if it's done properly, and I don't know, but it would be a little better for me than some of the animation efforts, which don't quite scratch that same Lime Grove Studio D itch.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. I mean, first of all, I believe we're all going to be in the same boat, and AI is going to take all our jobs, but that's neither here nor there. In the case of the Macra Terror, the story at the hand, I did watch the animation for that for this podcast for the first time. I had the DVD since it came out, and my God, I that's particularly an egregious one in my book. Because like I said, I'm a completionist. I want to see everything as best I can. I've gone on record saying I actually enjoy, the telesnaps because I can see what the sets actually look like. I can see what the costumes look like, all that kind of stuff, even somewhat some camera angles. But one of the most egregious things they did in this one was completely eliminate, the rough and tumble scene, all the relaxation stuff in the first episode, and I could not believe it. I was like flabbergasted. Why would you do that? Except for save money, which is kind of counterintuitive to me for the reason for putting out these animations in the first place.
I mean, I read this as a YouTube comment years ago, and it stuck in my head. In 1929, Disney is able to animate an entire boat full of dancing, synchronized barnyard animals. Why is it 90 years later can they not animate Patrick Troughton coming out of a rough and tumble machine, looking at his reflection in a pair of suede shoes?
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. I mean, I was right there. I was like, it took me out of the whole thing in the very first episode. And, not to mention, man, did they do Anarchy Wills dirty, and not in a good way. I don't think they animated her face very well. And there was, a couple other things that I didn't like. Especially the cliffhanger to episode 2, where literally the first thing I have ever seen of any image of this story was the emaciated controller being grabbed by the claw through the screen. And I can only imagine, of course we don't have a lot of footage at all from that except for the actual that happening, but the preamble to that, before the claw actually comes into the screen, the animation shows shadows of claws and smoke, and really telegraphing what's going to happen to him in a lot of ways. Sure, yeah, I know because I know the story, but I was like, man, that image had to be completely shocking at that time. We don't know who he's talking to, what he's saying, and all of a sudden that claw comes in, because up until that moment we just think, I don't know, the Macra are just sort of the watchdogs, keeping everybody in the colony. Not that they're actually controlling the colony. And so I think it really dilutes the shock of that scene. Although, I think the real beauty of that scene that really enhances it is, Anarchy Will's panic and when she's saying, "Oh my God, they're in control." I mean, that is terrifying stuff. She did a great job.
She is one of the best cliffhanger actors on the show. You have to know how to sell a cliffhanger, and she is always up for it. Similarly, Underwater Menace Part 1, she's being dragged off to this horrific surgery. We have the live footage of her performing that as part of the reprise of Episode 2 of Underwater Menace, which was now discovered over a decade ago. When they animate that, and I know you haven't seen Underwater Menace yet, the animation is not nearly up to the quality of live-action Annika Wills. So you're aware that you're watching a simulation. Episode 2 of Underwater Menace, the Doctor is furiously working with his hands while he's talking to Damon. And Damon doesn't know, but the Doctor is building a knockout bomb that is going to knock Damon out and allow him to escape. In the animation, you can hear Patrick Troughton furiously building this knockout bomb with his hands, but they don't animate it, so it's just two talking heads standing static. So it completely undercuts the moment because they're not physically capable of animating that sort of frantic Troughtonian physical activity. That being said, I am a major fan of the Celestial Toymaker animation, and I think that works better than the recovered episodes ever will. But that's kind of the exception that proves the rule. I think the animations are a good idea. I just don't know that the technology that they can use with the money they're given is up to the task of rebuilding the genius of these Lime Grove D episodes.
Absolutely, 100%. I totally agree. They serve their purpose, I guess, to make some money for the franchise. But at the same time, I think I'm going to really invest in Mr. Levine because it's the closest we'll have.
At the same time, I can't abide by a lot of Mr. Levine's opinions. He definitely falls into the grumpy old gatekeeper man of fandom, which is not my vibe. The one ground where he and I share a common Doctor Who belief is that the 60s stories were so well made, given the confines of the time. I want to see the lost footage. I don't want to see a brightly colored, reimagined version of the. I want to see the actual camera script put to life with the actors doing their magic.
Yeah, I mean, I hear you. I'm not trying to endorse any particular individual, but the art of it, I have to because it's really exciting to me. And I again, I don't pay. I've heard what people think of him and what he's said and of things he said, and I just don't pay attention to those things. I mean, people love to hate him, of course, but he's doing us a service, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, again, I haven't subscribed. I haven't paid yet. I don't know when I will or if I will. I have a lot of other things that I want to pay for, including the David X. Brunt First Doctor Production Diaries, which I still don't have because I've been very, very lazy. But it's a bucket list thing. It's a bucket list thing. Patrick Troughton. I am sitting there in California. We're living in Pomona in 2007. And I'm watching Gridlock via BitTorrent the day that it comes out, because this is before you had same day new series episodes airing in the States. I'm enjoying Gridlock. It's a very similar plot to one of my favorite Jonathan Lethem short stories, Access Fantasy, for those of you who are Jonathan Lethem fans. But halfway through the episode, the camera pulls back and you realize that this is a Macra colony. And Russell T. Davies, on the 40th anniversary of the screening of the Macra Terror, has given us a sequel to the Macra Terror. I had to pause the episode for several minutes to regain my composure. You don't expect, for a show that brought back the Daleks in 2005 and the Cybermen in 2006, and they're about to bring back the Master in 2007, but first you get the Macra. I think Russell T. Davies has an obsession with the story, and I'm sure you're not watching the newest series, but Dot and Bubble from this just finished season has very strong Macra Terror vibes. And that's Russell T. Davies again.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, I mean, good for him. Because I love this story. I absolutely, warts and all. I think there's so much that is just my jam. Anyways, forget about just being a Doctor Who story, but giant monster movies are totally my thing. After Star Trek and Doctor Who, I kind of found those, and Roger Corman, and I mean, I literally knew Samuel Arkoff's name before I knew my grandmother's name. I was so into these movies. I mean, I'm not kidding you. And and the fact that one of the coolest things about this story, I believe it's one of the few, if not, and maybe the first time that the series of Doctor Who actually went giant monsters. They've had monsters before, and of course we kind of settled on it settled into the base under siege thing, especially the following season. But and it's got the 1984 dystopian society. Given all that and all the tropes that I absolutely love, it's my favorite, I have to say, almost amazing story of Doctor Who. It just can't cross the finish line in a lot of ways. There's a lot of things that don't make sense, that are confusing. I mean, it's like, how did the Macra gain control? What are the Macra? Like when they reveal themselves to the controller, when the emaciated controller shows up on the screen and they strangle them. Why did they reveal themselves? I guess maybe they thought, oh, we could just gas everybody and brainwash them again, so they'll forget about this. I don't know. There's a lot of crazy stuff. And by the way, speaking about that, it's like everybody, look at. I've sucked a lot of meat out of crab claws. I know what a crab looks like, and apparently some of the characters in the story also know what crabs look like. But why do some people think they're? I mean, when the Doctor reveals the Macra to the pilot's like, "What are they? Bacteria? Insects?" I was like, "What do you mean, bacteria, insects? They're clearly crabs. Maybe you haven't seen that before. Maybe that's part of the character of the colonists here." But at the same token, you fast forward 10 years later to the invisible enemy, and you've got in a microscopic nucleus that looks like a shrimp. I mean, what the hell are they teaching in British biology?
The thing is, you can't just drop a Samuel Arkoff reference in the wild and then move on and not circle back to it. So we've got to talk about the American tradition of schlock horror. When you're talking about Samuel Arkoff, this was Roger Corman's boss. This is the guy that got Roger Corman started. And Roger Corman only just died in 2024. This is the guy that I was raised on stories from my father, who grew up in the era. I was raised on stories of I Was a Teenage Werewolf. I knew the plot of I Was a Teenage Werewolf before I discovered Star Trek, before I discovered Doctor Who. I mean, this is a man. He had a whole schlock formula. He later on did Amityville Horror. He also did Muscle Beach Party. I mean, this is a guy who had, and he lived into the 21st century. If you're talking about schlock horror, the king of the B movies, even before Roger Corman, I should say, took on that mantle. How do we tie that into the Macra Terror?
Well, I mean, obviously one of those films directed by Roger Corman was Attack of the Crab Monsters. Have you seen that?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, great.
That one I have not seen.
Oh my God. Has a great role by the amazing Russell Johnson.
Russell Johnson, so the professor for Gilligan's Island. Name his Twilight Zone episodes.
Back There in Execution. Absolutely. They're good, and they're both sort of time travel episodes as well, by the way.
The Execution, he's kind of playing a proto Gilligan's Island professor. Back There is a little bit different.
Well, right, but he does the time traveling in Back There, whereas someone else does it in Execution. But they're still time traveling episodes.
There's a great camera work at the beginning of Back There when they transition from a shot of the gentleman's club in the 20th century to a 19th century street scene. So, also, I am an Abraham Lincoln aficionado. So anytime Abraham Lincoln has a story told on Twilight Zone, I think The Passersby is one of the great Twilight Zones, and I'm one of the few to hold that opinion. But if Lincoln is in it, I'm all about it.
I'm one of the few too. I love that episode. It's great.
So Russell Johnson, Gilligan's Island, Twilight Zone, Roger Corman, Attack of the Crab Monsters, Samuel Arkoff. That's a nice little detour. When did you first encounter the Macra Terror? Was it as a recon or an audio or the novelization? How did you first come across it?
Well, like I said, it was a single still in this magazine. The BBC Doctor Who, the 20th anniversary, and of course on page 53, we got that iconic image of the emaciated controller about to be strangled by the giant crab claw.
Oh wow!
Not an insect pincher, a crab claw, no bacteria of any sort. And that's the first time I saw it. I was like, holy crap, I'm in. And then later I did see I believe the Loose Cannon. I think they had one, right? Yeah, of course it is.
Yes.
Loose Cannon. And then eventually I listened to the Colin Baker narration, which is pretty sparse. There's not a lot to it. And then I've seen the recreation on the reconstructions on YouTube a couple times, and then I actually watched it again for this podcast with the Annically Wills one they have on the animation DVD. So I've seen it enough times. As I said, I enjoy it very much. I know it too well. It's probably better than any other fully missing serial of Doctor Who there is.
So the magazine you showed me, what issue is that again?
That is not an issue. It is a special release for the 20th anniversary. It was distributed by Starlog here in the United States. It might have been as well in the UK. I'm not sure. But it's an awesome thing I've always had. It's full color. It has, giant pictures of all the monsters. And
oh, wow.
Poster, and it has,
color sensorites.
Man, I can't believe you've never seen this. This is awesome. It came out in 1983. I remember my friend bought it in the newsstand, and he loaned it to me like a week after he did, and he never got it back.
That has been mentioned. I think you mentioned it in our Five Doctors episodes. But yeah,
I do not have that. I did, yes.
What fascinates me is you showed me the picture of Graham Lehman being crushed by the Macra Claw. the photo on that page is larger than the photo of the 10th planet Cyberman and is larger than the photo of the Evil of the Daleks Emperor. So if you were to just look at that page alone and from that derive all your Doctor Who knowledge, you would think the Macra were a bigger deal than Daleks and Cybermen.
Yeah, well, even worse, look what's in the centerfold. You got the Celestial Toymaker.
Ah, wow. Sergeant
Talking
Rugg
about
and Mrs.
sexy.
Wiggs.
Michael Goff, though, how can you beat him? But anyways, yeah, there's so much I love about this, and not to mention, let's not, forget the elephant in the room, the parallels to The Prisoner, one of my favorite TV shows ever, along with Doctor Who. There are so many, it's not even funny. And, for obvious reasons, I don't know what you know about it, but, the author, Ian Stewart Black, was a contemporary of Patrick McGowan, and he was the producer of Danger Man. And there's no way they didn't talk about this or conceptualize this scenario. You look at all the everything that is parallel to the Macra Terror and what became The Prisoner, which aired on ITV, almost 16 months later, I think it was, or something like that.
When I was probably 8 or 9 years old, I watched an episode of The Prisoner on PBS, and I had a nightmare based on that episode that very night. And I have a prisoner phobia that is brought to me from this childhood dream. I have watched the first episode of The Prisoner, and I watched the first 20 minutes of the Jim Caviezel. Is that how you say it?
Yeah.
I watched the first 20 minutes of his ill-gotten remake and said, I never need to see this again. But I have never watched all 17 episodes of The Prisoner. I am aware that it is a shameful blind spot, and your look right now proves that it is a shameful blind spot. So I know
I'm going to press end record right now for you. Can I just do that?
Yes. Well, thanks very much, Barsky. We'll get another guest on to finish out the interview.
Well, listen, so let me just let you know how great this is and why it's so related to the Macra Terror. Can I do that?
You must.
In fact, no, actually this is actually the second time I read the book for this podcast. The first time was about 4 or 5 years ago when a volume was independently put out. You on Target. I don't think you're in this book, though.
You emailed me as submissions were about to close and begged me to submit a piece, and I was lazy and I never did. So the book made its way through life without my assistance.
Yeah, I emailed a bunch of people and got them involved. Stacy was one, Graham was one, my friend Kirk, Warren Fry actually did. He ended up doing Harry Sullivan's War for the book.
Oh,
anyway,
wow.
Yeah. So my first entry was the Green Death. But after a while, the editor put on Facebook saying, hey, we got some stories, some novelizations that were not chosen, and here they are. And I just need a quick blurb. So I, oddly enough, I got into a little mini I want to do it battle on Facebook with Drew. Your guest from last week, and apparently I won for some reason, and I felt a little constrained by the limit, but anyways, I just basically made a quick argument how Macra Terror makes a better Prisoner episode than it does a Doctor Who episode. It does a lot of great, and I could make it better here, but it does a lot of great and unique things for the Doctor Who show for sure. But I mean, the parallels to The Prisoner are just, I mean, with the use of gas to knock people out and brainwash them. I mean, there's a specific episode where people are educated, called The General, actually, is the name of it, and where they're all sort of knocked out, and a general educates them, and they get super smart because encyclopedic knowledge is immediately transferred to their mind somehow under this hypnosis. And the whole village is like that. So it's kind of like the controller here, letting everybody know there is no Macra. But if you look at the parallels, I mean, the controller in the Macra Terror is just like number one. Number one is the the nebulous leader we never see until the very end, who of the prisoner in the village. We never know who it is until the very end. Of course, the controller isn't really number one. We find out the Macra are actually number one. The pilot in the Macra Terror is like the number two. I don't know if you know the story is number two, but he's the real leader we always see and is always interacting. I say he is actually portrayed by a different actor almost every episode. And there's actually 2 episodes with female number twos.
I know this because in the very first episode that I did watch, number 2 is played by favorite of this podcast, James Bree of Full Circle and Ultimate Foe and War Games fame.
James Bree was never portrayed number 2. He was in an episode, and he didn't even act with McGowan. It was an episode where number 6, who McGowan plays, is actually played by another actor. His consciousness is in another actor. But James Bree never. I guess you can feel. But okay. Well, let's just say this: how many there are number 2s in The Prisoner that are played by Doctor Who actors, other Doctor Who guest actors? How many number 2s do you think were played by?
See, this is interesting. I have this very Mandela effect because I watched that episode in 2001 when the very first DVD set came out. It was the first 4 episodes, and I watched it once, and this is nearly 25 years ago, and I have this ironclad memory of going, "Oh, that's James Bree," and it turns out that I'm totally wrong, which means I now have to take a wild guess. So, who would have been number 2 in the episode that I watched? Because I clearly don't remember it. And secondly, if there were, how many number 2s were there?
All in all, it's very nebulous because what happens is the whole premise is, the prisoner, Patrick McGowan, is number 6, and he's given a number. He's taken away after he resigns from his special agent job and put on this island where all these retired special agents from various countries, even quote unquote enemy countries, are. So they're all like just living their life now, but Patrick McGowan's number 6 is not having anything of it, and he's trying to escape. And every time he makes an attempt, the number 2 gets fired, and there's a new number 2. So, and sometimes they come back. Sometimes within an episode, there are 2 number 2s because they get fired mid-episode. So there's probably about 20 people portraying number 2 throughout it.
All right, there's a lot of great British television actors. Not all of them cross over to Doctor Who. I want to say 25%.
Wait a minute, are you cheating? Are you looking on the internet?
No, I'm not. I'm looking at the Danger Man episode guide, by the way, because Ian Stewart Black.
Yes.
Okay. I want to say, if it's 20, I want to say 5. The nice 25% number.
Okay, you know what? You're absolutely correct. There are 5 that I've pinpointed. And by the way, you're talking about James Bree. You might be thinking of an actor that played the character of the controller that was always with number 2 in the control room. I think I just said the controller because that was I think supervisor. He was called the supervisor, and he was always with number 2. He looked like James Bree, wore the same sort of kind of glasses he does in perhaps the War Games. But he basically controls all the technical things, the observation of devices that are all around the village from this control room. So he's kind of like what was the name of the guy in the Officia? Kind of like, he's more like that guy. But anyways, 5 number 2s, man. One of them is Mary Morris.
Kinda.
Yep. Good old Peter Wingard.
We discussed him on Planet of Fire, yes. And that's when you introduced me to the spoken word album of Peter Wingard, yes.
Yeah, Don't Make Me Sing. Colin Gordon, do you know where he was? He didn't have a huge role in Doctor Who, but he actually played number 2 twice.
That one is beyond my memory. I don't know who Colin Gordon is.
He was the head of the airport in Faceless Ones.
Ah, okay.
So
not one of my favorite episodes. Not one where I've memorized the cast list.
Yeah. Darren Nesbitt.
Tigana.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, there's a character number 100 who Take One Guess was played by in that same episode he was in.
I would need a hint, or I would need the answer supplied to me.
Mark Eden.
Ah, Marco Polo himself.
Yeah, so it's kind of funny. And the final one's kind of a harder one to figure out because it's actually in the first episode. He was the replacement number 2 after the initial number 2 was fired. And that was George Baker, who was in Full Circle.
That might explain my Mandela effect memory, because George Baker in Full Circle co-starred with James Bree.
Oh, why didn't I think of that? Of course, yes. Okay, that's why what it is, because you said you saw the first episode, so that's got to be it. Yeah.
So circling back to Danger Man, which I also have not watched, and that sound is half my audience hitting stop on the episode and walking away and doing other things. So Ian Stewart Black appears to have co-written 4 episodes from the first season of Danger Man, which ran from late 1960 to early 1962. Louis Marks did an episode in season 2, but Ian Stewart Black doesn't seem to have worked on the show after writing the season 1 finale. So would Ian Stewart Black have had any input into The Prisoner, or was he one season and done on Danger Man?
He pretty much was, but he and McGowan were definitely friends, and they talked about this concept. They had to have. I mean, The Prisoner also takes place in this holiday camp setting. You know, I can't speak much of that. I mean, it's very much a British cultural thing, but you know, we've seen it in Doctor Who ourselves, and you know, via the Seventh Doctor's episode.
I grew up with the Catskills hotels. That is the American equivalent of holiday camps.
Well, there you go. That's probably very much true. I don't have that experience either, but I know what you're saying. You know, so you got the holiday camp setting, you got a control center where some nebulous overseer, you know, it's the controller here. It's sort of a blinking eye that is number 1 that gives off these, you know, beeps and electronic signals, and somehow number 2 understands them all when he talks to him. You know, as I said, they gas people to control their minds. There's some people who are, you know, regarded as quote unquote unmutual are usually taken in for some sort of torturous correction via some vague sci-fi electronic mind-bending machine, as we see happens to Medoc here, you know. So there's just too much to ignore, you know.
So the first episode of The Prisoner airs in September 67. That's 4 months after the Macra Terror. Mm-hmm. And of course it has an influence on Mask of Mandragora because of the Portmeirian Wales setting.
Yes, of course. But whatever the case, you know, I just think it's too hard to ignore. And it's one of the reasons, unfortunately, why I love it so much, this Macra Terror is, you know, I really, as I've mentioned, I don't know how many times on this podcast, I really like making these connections and seeing these evolutions and influences throughout the genre as I study it. And, you know, one of the things I just remember, one of the funniest things, funniest parallels is the pilot always seems really annoyed when Ola chimes in with something. He's got he's in the middle of, the pilot's in the middle of something, and you know, Ola says, "Hey, I got some news from the doctor," or whatever, you know. And that happens to number 2 all the time. It's usually because he knows, you know, something's going wrong with number 6, but number 2 in The Prisoner is always annoyed when he finds out there's something going on. So I'm not saying they got down to that level between the 2 shows, but I don't think, you know, Ian Stewart Black had a real influence on it, but I can almost guarantee, given what I know of McGowan and The Prisoner, and how fed up he was with being typecast as a secret agent, and, you know, he basically conceived The Prisoner as a sequel to that, and his frustrations of being typecast as a secret agent. You know, I think they probably talked about this when conceptualizing certain things and producing, you know, Secret Agent Man.
Secret Agent Man, of course, I knew that first from the theme song, which was a staple on oldies rock and roll stations in the late 80s. But again, I'm going to have to put that on my to be watched pile. Danger Man in the UK, Secret Agent Man in the US.
Yep. It's I've only seen 2 episodes myself. There was even one prisoner episode, A, B, and C, that gets really into. It's more of a spy thriller than a prisoner. They kind of couch it, with the whole thing is they're trying to get information out of number 6 as to why he resigned and what he knows, and it's more of like it takes place at an elegant party, like you would see in any James Bond film or secret agent man show. It's very, very secret. I was bored with it when I first saw it because the sci-fi element is very, very, very absent from it. But I appreciate it now for what it is.
This is fascinating because I came into Macra Terror with a completely different take because I'm not educated enough to see the parallels to The Prisoner. What does strike me, though, is the cast list. Just about everybody who had a role in Macra Terror was in at least one other Doctor Who story. So Ephisha was Professor Brett in The War Machines, which is a story that I enjoy a lot more than Macra Terror.
Oh,
Terrence Lodge.
He was actually. Oh no, not Ephisha. I'm thinking Ola was actually in a Gerton Klauber. He was in the same episode James Bree was actually in The Prisoner.
And he was in The Romans in Doctor Who running the slave galley.
Yep.
And Terrence Lodge, who plays Medoc. Medoc has a very different story arc in the novelization than he does on TV, but that's a story for my audio essay coming up.
Yeah.
Terrence Lodge comes back to the show several times, and I want to say that he was in Planet of the Spiders, the John Pertwee swan song.
That I don't know. But the pilot, Peter Jeffrey, did you mention him?
We're going to come to that because you were Androids of Tara. This podcast is an Androids of Tara house, so we'll come back to Peter Jeffrey. Yes, okay. Terrence Lodge was one of Lupton's henchmen in Planet of the Spiders. That is confirmed on the fact machine.
Good for you. I did not know that.
It's like when I play Immaculate Grid, the baseball game sponsored by Baseball Reference. It's 3 across, 3 down. You've got to find one baseball player who fits all 9 categories. When I first started playing last year, I was able to name all the categories just based on my knowledge. As I get older and the knowledge goes away, I find myself having a lot of false memories as to which player fits these categories. So it's like that with Doctor Who. I need to have independent confirmation now that Terrence Lodge or Medoc was in Planet of the Spiders. But luckily, in this case, my memory proved me right, which it did not in the case of James Bree and The Prisoner.
Right. Actually, there's also, he had a very brief couple of lines in episode 1, but Aaron Fairbairn, who was in Inferno and The Seeds of Doom, and maybe one other, I think.
He was part of Douglas Camfield's repertory company.
Yeah.
And Sandra Bryant was terrific in War Machines episode 1 as Kitty, Polly's friend who runs the nightclub.
Yep.
I don't know what happened with her being cast for this story, but she has exactly 4 words in episode 1. She's on screen for maybe 3 seconds. And then by the time 3 weeks later she has to come back for her line in episode 4, she's replaced. And the person who plays her in episode 4 doesn't even get any lines. Very strange circumstance there.
Yeah, what happened, I actually read, as I recall, that she got another job and she opted out of her contract. So what they probably did is wrote her out and didn't realize the character would come back, but they put her back in anyways, recast, which is kind of bizarre.
Yeah.
There might have been some sort of problems behind the scenes. I haven't really looked into that part, but there's a lot of, like, as I mentioned, a lot of weird stuff in this. It's like they don't really connect a lot of dots very well in this. Some of it's writing, some of it's probably in the production as well. And I got to tell you, it's Jamie's first good story. I think he's got great stuff to do. Maybe too much, because I think the Doctor isn't written all that well. I don't think he's very clever. In fact, other people are the catalyst for figuring stuff out. And like right from the start, when they leave the TARDIS, it's Jamie who says, "Hey, we just saw this crazy thing on the time visualizer," or whatever it was called, and and we got to protect ourselves. And the doctor's like, whatever. I'm just gonna play my recorder. And it's it's Medoc who says, when they very cumbersomely have the scene where Medoc is captured after the doctor go visit him on the outskirts of the colony. The doctor's talking to the pilot, and then all of a sudden, Medoc comes in. He was just with Medoc and Ola being escorted back to the colony. But then we have this brief scene between the doctor and the pilot, and then all of a sudden, Ola walks in, say, "Hey, Medoc's got some information," and he is the one who says, "Hey, the doctor was actually trying to convince me to come back, not helping me escape." And the doctor's like, "Oh yeah, that's right." It's like the doctor's not the clever one there, and that happens later on in, I think, episode 4. It's actually what am I talking about? It's the second episode when the controller is actually revealed for what he is. The doctor's the first one to say, "Hey, I want to talk to the controller. Who is he?" My God, that's that's another parallel. I mean, the prisoner asks, "Who is number 1?" And the doctor literally says, "Who is the controller?" He demands to know who the controller is. And as Patrick McGowan's number 6 is always demanding to know who number 1 is, because he wants to talk to the big chief. So anyways, he wants to know who he is, and the pilot agrees to let him talk, but it's Jamie who's very insistent to talk to a real person and not a still photograph on a screen, which is, sort of out clevers the doctor in certain ways. And I think he when he is sort of written cleverly, quote unquote, I think it's a big cop out. I mean, I think it's, you're being lazy if you're showing cleverness through mathematical or chemical formulas.
This is a moment when the second Doctor premieres. For his first few serials, you have your Power of the Daleks, you have your Highlanders, you have your Underwater Menace. The second Doctor is your trickster figure. He's always in costume. He's always putting on accents. The reason why Patrick Troughton's early tagline is "I would like a hat like that" is because he's always trying on different hats. When you watch or listen to the audio commentary for episode 1 of Power of the Daleks, which came out on animation, the designer specifically was taking the movie The 5,000 Fingers of Dr. T, the Dr. Seuss musical, as a direct influence on Patrick Troughton's Doctor, because Hans Conried wears this enormous hat, which he puts on at the end of a song where he's singing about getting dressed. And that was an influence on the second Doctor.
Dress me up from top to bottom, dress me up from tip to toe, dress me up in silk and spinach, for today is do-me-do, do-me-do day, do-me-do day. So come and dress me in the blossoms of a million pink trees. Come on and dress me up in liverwurst and camembert cheese. Come on and dress me up in pretzels, dress me up in bock beer suds.
All of a sudden, after Underwater Menace, that tagline goes away, but there's a vestige of it in the Macra Terror when the Doctor wants to go down and be part of the Danger Gang and get a gas mask and a helmet, and instead he's kept in the control room doing civilian work. Starting in the Moon Base, which is the serial before this one, all of that clowning, all of the accents goes away, and all of a sudden this is a Doctor who is doing everything through non-verbal movement and body language. So now the Doctor is in the margins, and he's figured out what's going on long before everyone else, but it only lets his knowledge out a little bit at a time. So Macra Terror is kind of the same thing. It is this new Troughton Doctor, the same Doctor we saw on the Moon Base, who doesn't talk much unless his companions do the talking, but when he speaks, he is our anarchist. Bad laws were meant to be broken. Confusion is best left to the experts. There's a lot of great punch your fist in the air moments where Patrick Troughton is doing his thing in the Macra Terror, and that is well preserved for the novelization, but it's not the same Patrick Troughton that he was playing for his first 3 months of the role. This is the second Doctor 2.0, and that's why Jamie gets the dialogue, because I believe, and again, this could be a false memory that has corrupted in my mind after being in there for so long, I believe Troughton wanted less dialogue, and he wanted more of it going to his companions, And his job was to confirm their theories rather than give them theories to begin with.
Yeah, I enjoy that about the Troughton doctor, sort of being the cat and mouse Columbo type of doctor. I don't mind that at all. I don't think it's to good effect here, though. Although you did mention another instance when the doctor wants to go down in the mine, but then it's Jamie like, hey, don't you want to stay? Well, it's Jamie and Medoc, I guess, who say, hey, you should stay up here and maybe figure out what the hell's going on. I mean, you can't convince me that the doctor is manipulating that and hoping that someone's going to say that. So I think that's an issue. Look, granted, yeah, they're still trying to find their way. This is what, fourth story for the Troughton Doctor? Fifth? I can't remember. I'm sorry.
This is fifth.
Fifth, yes. But as creatively bold as Verity Lambert and Whitaker were with the first Doctor, Innes Lloyd it was a chaotic time, obviously, and they're trying all kinds of stuff, including probably not understanding what the Doctor Who universe is and who the Doctor is in it. I mean, and interestingly enough, some of the more out there ones are also written by Ian Stewart Black. I mean, you look at the Savages when everybody seems to know what the Doctor is, as is the War Games. But both of those are very important, brand new, fronts for the series. I mean, the War Games famously sort of, the first contemporary story and, a prototype for all the unit stuff. It's great stuff.
Turning the tables on you, I think you're referring to the War Machines rather than the War Games.
Oh, geez, I said the War Games. Yes, misspoke. You're absolutely correct. It is the War Machines. I know very well that his final episode was the War Games. As I mentioned before, that's where James Bree was.
That's right. We have James Bree casting a malign influence on this podcast
that's
recording.
Right.
So, Samuel Arkoff, schlock horror, over the top. This is a Lime Grove D serial. You can't do that. You have the budget to afford one good actor, stock costumes, sets largely assembled out of stock. The Macra prop was so clumsy they couldn't move it. Annika Wills has to lock herself inside the pincers. Most of each of the 25 minutes in the 4 parts is characters standing around talking, and it's often secondary and tertiary characters having long conversations. You'll have the pilot and Ola having a long conversation, arguing with one another for 3 or 4 minutes to give the main cast a break or to have them time to get across the studio to another set or to change costumes. So the Macra Terror is a subtly made story, but it's a subtly made story about giant crabs because you're in the Lime Grove D format where most of the story has to be done by talking rather than action. Very similar to Dark Shadows because it is a live-to-tape soap opera filmed in Manhattan or videotaped in Manhattan. Most of each episode is 3 or 4 characters having long conversations. Maybe for 30 seconds, Barnabas puts on the fangs and chases somebody across the set. But it is a horror story told through long, static dialogue scenes, not the way Samuel Arkoff or Roger Corman would have produced it. So I think the Macra Terror misses the mark only because it is a Lime Grove D serial, and it has to tell its story with subtlety. And giant crabs don't deserve subtlety.
Yeah, no, they don't at all. And they also they're also very well conceived. And I can understand why it's pretty damn ambitious for the series at this time. But I'll tell you, you hit the nose on the head. Hit the nail on the head.
Well, yes, most noses are on heads. Yes,
it's James Bree's nose in the War Machines or the War Games. However, what I want to say is, like, you're absolutely right. And I think though it enhances the Macra Terror in the other sci-fi vein of the paranoid Red Scare sort of, invasion of the body snatchers thing. Because one of the things it fails at is, because it needs to be cheaper and we have less actors, is one of the things I wish I knew more, maybe because I like The Prisoner so much, I knew more about this colony. I mean, yeah, we see the sort of the rah, we know they're miners, but I would have, what we learn of the whole the gassing and the brainwashing comes through Ben, and they probably did that through his character to save money, so we wouldn't have to pay another actor or something. But the fact that Ben is taking control, I mean, man, talk about the paranoia from within, the Red Scare there. I mean, that really works as a sci-fi trope in this story very well. Whereas, as you said, the crabs don't so much.
But this is the first time in Doctor Who, and we're talking in production order, 1963 to 1967, this is the first time that a TARDIS crew member betrays the Doctor, because this is a story about mind control, subliminal messages in your sleep, which is very 1960s, very Manchurian Candidate. The easiest way to show how mind control affects the TARDIS crew is to have one of the TARDIS crew get mind controlled. And anytime there's brainwashing involved, you have a character, and in this case it's somebody that we have really enjoyed for the past year. They only listen to unprovable and demonstrably false propaganda from someone they've never met, and they ignore their friends and loved ones. So classic political propaganda, brainwashing, Manchurian Candidate, QAnon, enter your political boogeyman here.
Yeah,
it is very important.
There is no border czar. There is no laptop. Yeah, we get it. There is no recession.
My 401k is doing phenomenally. Thank you very much. If this is a recession, recess me more, baby.
Yeah.
But getting back to the point of Ben being brainwashed by Fox News, I mean the Macra Terror, you need to have a companion be the one brainwashed, and the Macra Terror is the first story to get there, but it makes the Macra Terror timeless, because this is a story that still resonates in 2024 as much as 1967, because we all know folks who have fallen for the conspiracy Kool-Aid, Ben, and what have you.
Oh yeah, well, you don't want to go there with the parallels of the Macra Terror to the current administration. You do not.
I was thinking more. Remember, I watched the Macra Terror shortly after January 6, 2021, so my review for the ratings guide goes in a very different direction to where you're going.
Yeah, well, you should watch it again after somebody who's very good at on a TV screen reading scripted lines all of a sudden doesn't have scripted lines, and then the pincers come in off stage, the pincers of Nancy Pelosi, and crush them. Yeah.
And how did those hostages get freed from Russia again?
Oh yeah, after they freed the basketball player, sure.
Anyway, getting back on point to Doctor Who.
Yeah.
Peter Jeffrey. Let's talk for a minute about Count Grendel, because Count Grendel is one of the great Doctor Who villains, and the pilot is just not in the same league as Count Grendel, so it's not Peter Jeffrey's finest hour. So we'll make this the Peter Jeffrey Appreciation Society. Why is Count Grendel so great?
Maybe because he's over the top. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I love everything about the androids and Terra, but first thing I think about is the costumes, though.
Well, yes, Mary Tam, yes.
Yeah, of course. Purple and green work. They always have.
Well, you also have Annika Will's new hairstyle in this story.
Yeah, not a fan. I don't think that works for her. Not the short hair is just not good for her. I like Polly with the bob or whatever she had.
Annika Wills is for me, most underrated companion. I have met Annika Wills. I've spent a little bit of time with Annika Wills, but just to watch Polly between War Machines and Faceless Ones, she is easily the best of the three companions. And yes, Jamie comes into his own later, but when Annika Wills is there, it is the Annika Wills show, and the other companions are just background figures. She is everything. She does everything so well, and the episode 2 cliffhanger here kind of epitomizes that.
Yeah, I think overall, though, do we ever really get to know Polly? I mean, I think she's got some real shining moments, but you look back, I was like, what really defines her? I mean, maybe answer that for me. Tell me. I'm open.
You're critiquing the lines that she's given because the production crew really didn't care who Polly was. I'm critiquing the way she performs the lines and her body language.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I hear you. No, there's nothing wrong with that at all. I do agree with that. She is a great actress.
I mean, the way she wrinkles her nose the same way that Lala Ward wrinkles her nose, and that is my kryptonite. Women wrinkling their nose is my kryptonite.
I'm not going to say what mine is.
Well, there's also Elizabeth Montgomery in Bewitched, which was also my kryptonite growing up.
Oh yeah, how did you even get through that
films.
show, man? You couldn't watch that. I love that show.
Yeah, Bewitched is one of the great 1960s American sitcoms, kind of contemporaneous to the Macra Terror, although of course there's no real connection between the two.
Okay, yes.
Just tossing out old TV show names here.
Yeah, we've done
Prisoner,
a lot of that today.
Danger Man, Bewitched, Gilligan's Island, Twilight Zone.
Yeah. So that's for a good podcast, man. It makes for a good podcast.
All right, so we are reaching the end of our allotted hour talking about the Macra Terror. I'll be doing my audio essay if I have any listeners left after the break. But how did the novelizations strike you? This is a story that has intense meaning for you. You obviously have the Danger Man prisoner connection that I sorely lack. What does Ian Stewart Black do in the novelization 20 years later that makes us a different or a better or a worse story than Macra Terror on TV, which was hamstrung by production issues because of the budget and the fact that this is all being filmed 1 week before broadcast, so they have absolutely zero safety net.
He certainly channels his inner Dix. I think he's line for line. I think he fails. I mean, even with the opening few paragraphs, I think he's trying to be more poignant than he can possibly be. And he doesn't. He plays it almost line for line. He does a few weird things, like the exposition. When they first arrive is like, hey, colonies like this always have a pilot, things like that. Without instead, it comes out through dialogue instead of action and natural prose, the way someone else would write it per se. And he makes a weird. I don't get the only other thing that really stood out to me is like, why is he calling Macra men? There is no Macra men. There is no Macra men. That is bizarre to me.
It is funny because you are basically reading my audio essay script. You are hitting a lot of the same points.
So in other words, you're going to cut this out.
Sorry?
So in other words, you're going to cut this out.
No, I'm not going to cut this out. I do not do much editing. This is just, raw, unfiltered.
Yeah. No, it's just a really bizarre choice. I don't know why he would ever do that. Of course, he's got his characters thinking they're insects or bacteria as well. So why not, men?
I want to point out to you that I have Smudge in my hands right now, and she's looking at you on camera. This is the cat who was hiding from us all day long because she didn't want to go to the boarding as we go on vacation, and now she's jumping up on the monitor screen.
It must be the sound of my dulcet tones
filtered through my headset. But yeah, there are passages in the book that could have been written by Terrence Dix, and that is a compliment because we are in a rough patch of Target novelizations. Mm-hmm. This comes out a month after the massacre, which is going to be next week's episode, and I recorded my audio essay for the massacre today, and reading some of John Lucarati's mother of all run-on sentences almost taxed my limited lung capacity. This book at least is short, propulsive sentences and is a pleasure to read aloud, a la Terrence Dix, even if it's not as adept and skillful as Terrence Dix at his best.
Yeah, it definitely isn't. Definitely is his best. But I was really actually disappointed when I first read this novel for that other publication, as I was mentioning, that it was because a lot of these guys, whether they succeeded or not, when in this period of novelizations, really tried to expand on their ideas. At least there was something there, but he doesn't make that effort at all here, and I was really bummed about that.
He does come back. Ian Stewart Black writes one novelization after this, and that is the novelization not of the war games, as you were calling it earlier, but the novelization of the war machines. And that is about 4 months down the line in the life of this podcast. That'll probably be episode 136. he goes very far afield from the TV script on that one, because that's already the era of the Seventh Doctor novelizations that are definitely bulking up on the source material. Macra Terror, he's not there, so this is more of just him novelizing the camera scripts with stage directions. It will get better for Ian Stewart Black, I will promise you that, even though you're not my guest for the War Machines.
Well, I know, but I still appreciate everything he's done for the series. I think, like I said, they tried new things, and I think with, as I said, with the Savages, as weird as that show was, and trying to, maybe he just misunderstood what the Doctor was in the universe, but there are some very innovative things going on in all three of his stories, even though they probably didn't quite execute them. Most successfully probably in the War Machines, for sure.
Haven't talked much about Innes Lloyd on this show, but he definitely altered the format of Doctor Who, which was a very different creature under Verity Lambert. So you have the base Under Siege format, you have this quieter Doctor who's a marginal figure. You can compare the Savages. William Hartnell shows up. He figures out something is wrong. He immediately confronts the elders of the city with a club and is immediately arrested and almost gassed to death. Patrick Troughton figures out something is wrong, but he's an anarchist about it, and he doesn't confront the elders directly. He just goes and causes lots and lots of mischief until the elders are forced to arrest him at the same point in the story, halfway through episode 2. But Patrick Troughton has a lot more fun confronting authority than the William Hartnell Doctor is allowed to have. So I see parallels between Macra Terror and the Savages, whereas you see parallels with the Prisoner. But I think the Macra Terror is the Savages done in a more entertaining way, because you have a different Doctor who's being played, and that's the beginning of Innes Lloyd tenure versus the end of Innes Lloyd tenure. This is almost the perfection of the format.
Oh yeah, because he finally had conversations with McGowan about this vision is probably why he was able to improve on the Savages, which I don't dislike at all. It's another one of the most fascinating stories to me, because we don't have it, and there's so much weird and new things going on for the series. Maybe it's just the curiosity factor that really attracts me to all of these.
So that's going to be it for the Macra Terror. You're going to be back on the show in about 6 weeks discussing you're coming back again. You're going to be for every Doctor. So your Colin Baker story is coming up next. I won't say which one, but of course there aren't too many Colin Baker stories left to novelize, so maybe the audience can guess. Answers on a postcard. So anything else you want to leave us with? I showed you my Jaws Lego set at the top of this recording. Do you have any recommendations for me? What is giving you joy in life right now? What is your current non-Doctor Who obsession? What's going on in the land of Barsky?
Oh my God, my current non-Doctor Who obsession. It's gotta be my heavy metal vinyl collection.
Ooh.
I've been buying a lot of stuff lately and really enjoying finding like really rare stuff here in Los Angeles, and it's kind of cool. But yeah. And that's about it. Probably bands you've never even heard of or even want to listen to.
See, you and I are a couple of years apart, but because the half-life of pop music is 18 months, a lot happens in those 2 years. I came of age at a moment when Top 40 radio was dominated by Phil Collins, Rod Stewart, late 80s vanilla Elton John. I had very banal musical tastes for a very long time until I discovered the Doors senior year of high school. My metal knowledge is definitely not going to be nearly the equivalent of yours. I can tell you that much.
Well, there's not a lot of people I know who can say that they do have. I have too much knowledge probably. But I'm not bragging or anything. It's just like kind of obsessive about it in some ways, and almost apologizing for it in others. But I will tell you, if you really want to look into things, the best year in music was 1983, based on only, I think, the variety of music that was in the top 40 back then. With who jogged for number one back then. You had the Police, ZZ Top, Def Leppard, Quiet Riot, Culture Club, crazy Michael Jackson. How did I forget that? I mean, amazing year in music. Some people say it's 84. I'm still leaning towards 83. I've been preaching that for 20 years.
My two favorite facts about ZZ Top: 3 members in the band. 2 of them are characterized by their beards.
I know
the
what you're
third
gonna
member
go
of
with.
the band doesn't have a beard, but his name is Beard.
Yeah.
Other fun fact: the long-running Fox police procedural Bones, starring David Boreanaz as a stuffy FBI agent. One of the lab characters on Bones at that show's version of the Smithsonian, who was helping David Boreanaz solve all these murders. In universe, the character's father is ZZ Top, Billy Gibbons. So Billy Gibbons shows up several times on Bones as himself playing this character's father. Not a great show, but it ran for like 15 years. That is the best use of a recurring celebrity playing themselves on a TV series that I can think of.
That's insane. I had no idea about that. I really don't watch TV, so I have no idea.
You're too busy making it.
Well, not of late, but whatever.
There has been a TV apocalypse as the streaming bubble bursts. My wife knows a lot of folks who are trying to find work right now.
Just about everybody I know is trying to find work right now. And all these gigantic super corporations that never should have merged in the first place and overinvested in streaming are downsizing big time. Just overspending.
Well, before you start sounding like a leftist, I think it's time to wrap this up, my friend.
Oh, God help us all.
Barsky, this has always been a pleasure. In about 6 weeks, we're going to be talking about a story that I really don't have much room for, so I suspect you'll be definitely clubbing me over the head with your opinion on that story.
Oh, interesting. Well, it's going to be a conversation for sure, because I don't know how I feel about it right now myself.
It is a truly abysmal book, I can say that much. If you thought the run-on sentences in the Massacre were bad, when you and I get to that book in 6 weeks, some of those run-on sentences go on for pages.
Well, all right then. We have something to look forward to.
Barsky, be seeing you.
There is no Macra.
Doctor Who, The Macra Terror by Ian Stewart Black. Televised as The Macra Terror. Teleplay by Ian Stewart Black. Televised in March and April 1967. Paperback release date December 10th, 1987. Target book number 123. Cover artist Tony Masero. In the far future, a group of humans is living an idyllic existence on a distant planet. Their colony is run like a gigantic holiday camp, and nothing seems to trouble their carefree existence. When one of them claims that the colony is being invaded by hideous monsters, no one takes him seriously. But the doctor's suspicions are immediately aroused. What is the terrible menace that lurks at the heart of this apparent paradise? Why are the colonists unaware of the danger that lies before their very eyes? And what is the Macra Terror? This is a rare Doctor Who novelization with a dedication. Not too many have them. Christopher H. Bidmead and Donald Cotton have used them, Bidmead very sarcastically in the Castrovalva novelization. But otherwise they are a very undervalued space. Here, Ian Stewart Black, writing the second of his 3 novelizations, dedicates the Macra Terror, quote, especially for the entertainment of the Doctor Who Appreciation Society, and in brackets he adds, amongst others. This is a 1986 manuscript, and Doctor Who's center of gravity has already shifted to fandom. The book opens with a 5-page TARDIS scene that doesn't appear on TV. The previous TV serial, The Moon Base, ended with a cliffhanger in which massive crab claws were seen on the TARDIS scanner. But in Target Land, the novelization of the Moonbase, Doctor Who and the Cybermen, was the 12th Target book published, and this is the 123rd, so that was an awfully long time ago, both in real time and in the life of this podcast. And Doctor Who and the Cybermen had eliminated that cliffhanger ending anyway. So here the 5-page prologue serves to reintroduce that cliffhanger, but begins with 2 full pages of faffing about, describing the TARDIS's inner workings, none of which is relevant to the TV story, which featured exactly no TARDIS scenes. It's not even until the 3rd page that we hear about the crab claws, and the Doctor has some bizarre bit of intuition that the holiday camp commandant is called a pilot, and not, say, Burton. Editorially, that's an unusual way to open the book, which on TV had a terrific opening, an extreme close-up of Medoc's eyes, which are the lens through which we view this story, the only pair of eyes that can see the deadly danger hiding at the heart of this seemingly idyllic, as the back cover blurb says, holiday colony. The book could have opened the same way, with more thematic material and less faffing about. What's funny is the first paragraph of Chapter 2, page 15, makes much more of an impact in introducing the story, told as it is through Medoc's eyes. And one wonders if this wasn't the original opening, and if there wasn't some editorial decision instead to put the TARDIS on page 1. I know that when I was a kid I wanted the TARDIS on page 1, and books like The Ice Warriors, where the TARDIS doesn't show up until page 17, used to try my patience. Here is how that page starts in the book. Quote, Medoc knew he would only be a few minutes ahead of his hunters, and there would be many. He had to make as much use as possible out of his start. He was a strong man. Years of hard work had made him tough, and he went up the slope at speed, through bracken and bushes, crossing boggy ground, leaping dead wood and fallen branches. These were forests no one came to, and for very good reason, Medoc thought grimly to himself. Even now he feared what he might see through the trees. But he told himself he would be in no danger here, at least not until night, and a pale sun still glinted through leaves. To my 50-year-old eyes, this is much more interesting than opening in the TARDIS. Polly, on page 26, as she exits the Wizard of Oz-style Wash and Brush Up Company, which is nearly the name of the chapter, quote, the scatterbrained, kooky, vivacious blonde with the long legs had vanished and become a glamorous woman. Ouch. I think that's 30% compliment, but yes, Annika Wills, one of the most underrated female companions in Doctor Who's 61-year run, sports a new hairstyle this serial. In the book, but not on TV, is Ben making a dig at Jamie's dour, Scottish, quote, north-of-the-border attitude, which thank goodness wasn't on TV. What is new for the book is the author constantly drawing attention to the Second Doctor's classic Troutney habit of saying little, but conveying his troubled thoughts with non-verbal gestures. Page 27, quote, it wasn't until a little later that the Doctor began to wonder why their hosts had gone to such lengths to entertain them. It was as though they had wished to divert their attention from something. He was only able to make guesses about their motives, and perhaps he was wrong. The little bits and pieces that he had put together in his mind did not add up to very much, but he guessed he must remain on the alert. Some sixth sense was warning him that what they had been allowed to see was not the complete story. But then, it seldom was. Chapter 3 seems to have a couple of clues as to Black's original scripts, as there are some changes from the TV version, which I suspect are vestiges of an older script, rather than changes specifically made for the book. Page 37 features the rather dull instruction, quote, Number 9 shift to stand by, leader to report to the labor center. That line is very similar to the TV, except on TV it's the youth center. The TV version is much better. A colony like this, where slave labor for the Macra is described in Orwellian tones as voluntary play for attractive young people, and that reminds me a wee bit of the work the pretty young social media influencers do in Dot and Bubble, a script by Russell T. Davies, the same guy who brought the Macra back for the new series in 2007. Oh, and speaking of Orwellian, Patrick Troughton is one of many doctors who's played Winston Smith in an adaptation of 1984, in his case for BBC Radio in 1965, a year before he was cast as Doctor Who. That's up on YouTube, and I played it several years ago. Quite good. Other changes in Chapter 3. Chicky, a character played by Sandra Bryant, who'd been so wonderful on the War Machines a year earlier on TV, gets exactly 4 words in Episode 1, and then leaves mid-production, and someone else plays her without dialogue in Episode 4. The name Chicky is removed from the book, making her a nameless, faceless extra. Ophicia and Pete on TV are played by Alvis and Questa in the book, giving Questa more to do than just his one scene on TV. The character name changes sound like the work of a script editor to me. The book is 12 chapters long and covers a 4-episode story, so you might go in expecting a Terrence Dicks-style novelization where the cliffhangers fall neatly every 3 chapters. You'd be wrong. Black places the Episode 1 cliffhanger in the middle of a section halfway through Chapter 4. This chapter ends with a very alarming TV dialogue altered from the following to describe the story's title menace as, quote, Macra men.
This is an emergency. Control must be believed and obeyed. No one on the colony believes in Macra. There is no such thing as Macra. Macra do not exist. There are no Macra!
That incidental music is insane, by the way. Didn't need to leave that in there, but I like hearing it. The only notable change in Chapter 5 is not a change, but another alteration to the draft script, minus Patrick Troughton's genius for ad-libbing. The line is scripted and appears in the book on page 56 as, quote, I've been scotching a rumor, as the Doctor burns out these subliminal messaging circuits in their colony guest cabins. But on TV, Patrick amends the line to, quote, scotching a rumor, or should I say scorching, which adds on the pun on what he'd actually been doing. Bet Ian Stewart Black wishes he'd written that ad-lib himself. Chapter 6 zips along with the cliffhanger, sold on TV by Annika Wills' Screaming and beloved so much by David Barsky, placed on page 73, 1 page before the end of the chapter.
This is your controller. This is your controller.
He's an old man.
Well, now you've seen the controller.
Well, let him speak.
Be silent! That is an order!
Let him speak.
Be silent!
I've not given the orders. He
This
can't
is the
talk.
man. You will hear him speak. Speak, controller. Speak!
Am I to speak?
Tell the strangers to believe and obey.
I will tell them. I will tell them. I'll do what you say. Keep away. Don't touch me. I'm a man.
What's that? What's happening?
That was it! It's a picture that was the claw! They're in control!
Take them out of here. They're condemned to the pit. No.
Macra!
Take them away.
They're in control!
And a point I didn't raise when talking to Barsky earlier, I love the soundscape of this story, the incidental music, and the Andrews Sistery vibe of the colony jingle, the We Are All Ready to Work jingle. Makes the story so much more interesting, that soundscape, than just the visuals alone. Ben and Polly hiding from giant crabs and half-built houses also goes into Chapter 6. The writing is a bit simple, but at least it keeps the story moving, which is more than we can say for some other books we've covered here recently, like, I don't want to name names, but say a title that rhymes with, Ray Pine and Schmumpany. The opening paragraphs of Chapter 7 move nicely, and sound a little like something Terrence Dicks could have written, which is one of the nicest things that I can say about any non-Terrence novelization. Page 75. The pit head was nothing like Jamie had imagined. A great mass of glittering equipment, surrounded by banks of dials, computers, indicators, calculators, hummed and throbbed with a rhythm that overwhelmed him. A huge pump dominated the mechanism, moving slowly, continuously. like the beat of some fantastic heart. In the background, a dynamo hummed. Panels of equipment were given over to a range of communications. Mankind was dwarfed amongst it all. The next page, page 76, has Ola reflect, quote, "He found it hard to understand this man," and I'm talking about the Doctor here, "he found it hard to understand this man who appeared to take nothing seriously, not even when his own life was threatened." That sounds like Terrence too. Chapter 8, Escape, begins Black's radical rewrite of the book. On TV, prisoner Medoc leaves Polly in the lurch down in the pit in order to escape. The TV script gives Polly the plaintive line, quote, "Hey, wait, don't leave me down here." Medoc abandons her and is killed by a Macra in the very next scene as punishment for his sins, but not in the book. On TV, we last see Medoc being choked by a prop Macra claw. In the book, he wakes up after that moment, page 97, with Black perhaps acknowledging the divergence from TV by writing, quote, "By rights he knew he should no longer be alive." And the chapter ends with, quote, "His heart rose. In the distance, he could see daylight." He's escaped the mine and Macra-infested tunnels. Medoc was a key character to the story. The TV opens with a close-up of his eyes, except he dies randomly in the middle of episode 3. Now on stage, it's okay to kill off your main characters, because you keep them around after they're dead, as ghosts. They can even sing to us the songs of the dead. See, for example, the stage versions of Little Shop of Horrors, or Hamilton, or Heathers. They all do this. But you can't really do that on Doctor Who, at least in the classic series, where dead people stayed dead. The new series doesn't have that problem. So Black just restores Medoc to life, as with Terrence Dudley, who in his 2 novelizations resurrected characters who's died on TV. Black here chooses life for Medoc. Chapter 9 is made up of 16 distinct sections with double-spaced paragraph breaks between each section. That may or may not be a record, but it does mean that Chapter 9 is probably more full of blank space than any other chapter in any other Doctor Who novelization. Chapter 1, by way of comparison, was made up of just 2 sections. Chapter 10 is the Highland Fling chapter, one of Jamie's early standout moments on Doctor Who. The character doesn't really crystallize into focus until episode 3 of The Faceless Ones. His first episode is the Doctor's primary companion, and that's 3 weeks after this episode, episode 4 of the Macra Terror, goes out. So this is a precursor of what Jamie as a character is able to do. The TV version is full of the colony's intentionally banal chants, of which there are a lot more on TV than Black reduces to writing for the book. Let's take a listen to one of those wacky chants.
What do you know? We don't know control is right, and we must obey. Let them know, let them know. Let them know they're happy. Greet the morning with a shout. Everyone up, the sun is out. Rah, rah, rah. Rah, rah, rah. Here's the colony, we're the gang that works the hardest, and we must obey. Obey control, ring the bell. Rah, rah, rah. Rah, rah, rah. Work well, ring the bell. Oh, that's much better, but we'll do it again, and this time with more feeling. And don't forget, our job is to inspire the others, our brave workers who are doing such a dangerous job. All right? All right. What do you know? We all know control is right, and we must obey. Let them know, let them know. Let them know they're happy. Greet the morning with a shout. Everyone up, the sun is out. Rah, rah, rah. Rah, rah, rah. Oh, that's very good. That's beginning to sound like something.
Also, all the TV exhortations that the cheerleaders give to Jamie about being gay and happy in 1967 are not present in 1987, which gives you a clue as to the exact moment when that word irrevocably lost its earlier meaning. If we take the book as reflecting the dialogue from Ian Stewart Black's final submitted script, we see an interesting change in Chapter 11. The book line is the second Doctor telling the pilot, quote, "Laws were meant to be broken. Speaking on behalf of my profession, hey." But on TV, the line is changed, softened, made less anarchic. Now it becomes, "Bad laws were meant to be broken." Totally different head, man. Totally different head. Usually, target books rush towards their conclusion as the author runs out of page count. We saw this a lot much earlier in the life of this podcast when we were still on the Malcolm Hulke novelizations. Black has sort of the opposite issue here. His Chapter 12 is full of good stuff which was not on TV, possibly cut for time or content. The Doctor gets a valedictory speech after the Macra are blown up. For one thing. Quote, "What's happened, Doctor?" asked the pilot. "I think your planet has been returned to its rightful inhabitants," said the doctor gravely. "Well done, Ben," he added, "although you did cut it a little fine." They stood looking at the great crater that lay beyond the screen. "And the Macra?" asked the pilot. The doctor shook his head. "The artificial structure in which they survived has been blown apart. The people of this colony are going to have to learn to look after themselves. It will bring them freedom, but it will have its own problems. Same as we do, eh, Doc?" The doctor nodded. "Exactly the same." And of course, Medoc returns in the very final scene, and we're told that he eventually rejoins the colony, lives there for years, and intends to, quote, "be more discreet in future. He wouldn't stick his neck out again." Of course, that's entirely the wrong message to send. Medoc is the one who is correct all along. Another character in the book even validates him in the episode 4 material, in a line of dialogue that was not on TV. Medoc should have become the colony's new pilot, because he was the man who saw through the monsters. But of course that couldn't happen on TV because Medoc was long since dead by that point, so I suppose the triumph just lies in the fact that Ian Stewart Black chooses to bring him back to center stage and end the novelization with him. Speaking of dead bodies, next time on Doctor Who Literature, the massacre. Thank you for joining me on another episode of Doctor Who Literature. The executive producer of this podcast is David Barsky. The podcast is produced by Jim Sangster and yours truly. This week's episode was written and edited by me. Our logo was designed by Jim Sangster. Special thanks to my special guest, executive producer David Barsky. This podcast can be found on most of your podcast apps of choice. You can find all past episodes at podcasters.spotify.com/pod/show/DoctorWhoLit. It really helps if you rate 5 stars and subscribe. You can find me on Blue Sky and YouTube at Doctor Who Novels, that's DrWho Novels, and on email at Doctor Who Literature, that's drwholiterature@gmail.com. Please drop me a line with your comments, questions, and suggestions. Thank you for listening. And whatever you do, there's no such thing as Macra men. No such thing as Macra men. The Macra men do not exist.
A Doctor Who podcast network.